Day 3 with Russell Brand. See it first on Rumble. Whitney, I've been watching some of your interviews, and I've got to say, it's one of those, the area of your research and expertise is one of those areas that's actually almost scary to talk about, because we on this show are continually talking about hypocrisy, corruption, the deep state, democracy being a kind of hollow and theatrical affair where real power is beyond the reach of ordinary people. We sort of infer sometimes that people may get assassinated because their interests and the stories that they tell are at odds with the agenda of powerful people. But how much proof you appear to have and your willingness to talk about it is somewhat staggering. So I guess there's to start with Jeffrey Epstein and his ties to incredibly powerful global figures, former President Bill Clinton and one of the world's most powerful tycoons, Bill Gates. Can you just sort of unpack for us the nature of these relationships, which have sort of, like, while people are peripherally aware of it, it seems to be something that's somehow been submerged and lost?
Sure. So if you look at the mainstream narrative about Epstein, no one in mainstream media wants to talk about Jeffrey Epstein and what he was doing before the year 2000. So if you look at the timeline with Epstein and Bill Clinton, for example, what you see is that from 1987 till roughly 1993, Jeffrey Epstein was one of the masterminds of one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history. And financial criminality is consistent throughout his career. When that was being prosecuted, Jeffrey Epstein's name was dropped from the case in 1993, and that same year he appears at Clinton fundraisers, some of the most controversial fundraisers of the entire Clinton administration. For example, in 1993, it was a fundraiser associated with the White House Historical Association being nominally run by the office of Hillary Clinton. It makes an appearance in Vince Foster's alleged suicide note, who was the White House counsel that died under very suspicious circumstances. And then Epstein was involved in, roughly after that, 15 visits to the White House in less than a 2-year span with a man named Mark Middleton, most of them were with Mark Middleton, who was a central figure in the 1996 campaign finance scandal, also known as Chinagate in some circles. And essentially there you have Epstein being involved in a massive way with those financial tricks, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word. And at the same time, he's involved in relocating Southern Air Transport, the CIA-linked airline involved in Iran-Contra, from its headquarters in Miami, Florida, to Ohio to ostensibly run cargo for Leslie Wexner's enterprises, where they'll be going from Columbus to Hong Kong, which interestingly enough was a major hub for a lot of this corruption in 1996 involving Mark Middleton, who Epstein's meeting with at the same time. Subsequently after this, which is the only time where mainstream media starts to talk about the Clinton-Epstein relationship, Clinton is out of office and setting up the Clinton Foundation. And a lot of the setup for the Clinton Foundation he is doing while flying on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, specifically the Africa trip, but also the Asia trip. And things out of this that come out of this are things like the Clinton Health Access Initiative, with later partners with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in very significant ways. So essentially what you have there is, considering that the Clinton Foundation's sort of been treated as a political slush fund of the Clinton family, you have Jeffrey Epstein over a period of decades being involved in essentially guiding the most suspect financial activity of the Clinton family from the early 90s onward, and including their rebranding of their, political cronyism as philanthropy. I'll pause before getting into Bill Gates, because that's a totally different story.
I mean, yeah, this is before we've got to Bill Gates. I mean, I didn't know that Epstein's skullduggery went all the way back to Iran-Contra. It seems like wherever there's corruption, Jeffrey Epstein was there, like a kind of Forrest Gump of global corruption. So is it then that even before you get to the salacious sexual underage sex trafficking abuse side of the Jeffrey Epstein story, there's mammoth financial corruption and the involvement of significant political and corporate figures?
Yeah, the financial criminality aspect of Epstein's career spans essentially from the late 70s all the way up until his second arrest in 2019. Whereas the sex crimes, as far as we know, span sometime between 1991 and up until his first arrest around 2006, 2007 or so, at least the bulk of those sex crimes that we know about.
And what is the nature of the connection with Bill Gates? Now that you've done the first Bill, let's move on to the second.
Right. So if you believe mainstream media, Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein didn't meet until 2011, but that is unfortunately for Bill Gates contradicted by evidence that's actually in mainstream media. So for example, the Evening Standard, a pretty mainstream outlet in the United Kingdom, has an article from, I believe, January 2001, where it's talking about Ghislaine Maxwell and her relationship with Prince Andrew, and discusses Jeffrey Epstein, introducing him to a UK audience. There it introduces him as a property developer, and says that he made most of his millions through his business links to three individuals: Leslie Wexner, Donald Trump, and the third one is Bill Gates. So why would the Evening Standard name Bill Gates as one of the main business partners of Jeffrey Epstein during the 1990s if they didn't meet until roughly a decade later? No one in mainstream media has been interested in following that up with me, even though I've been contacted by outlets such as the BBC for that information, and then, never goes anywhere. And even beyond that, if you're looking at some other aspects of the Epstein-Gates relationship, you have a woman named Melanie Walker come along, who was allegedly recruited by Jeffrey Epstein to be a Victoria's Secret model in 1992. There's no evidence she ever modeled, but she became Epstein's science advisor in the late 90s, and shortly thereafter became science advisor to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If you're Bill Gates and you're hiring a science advisor for your relatively new foundation, and you're looking at her CV, and all it really has is a science advisor to Jeffrey Epstein, you would have to know who Jeffrey Epstein is and what kind of science he was into. And this, again, is well before the 2011 date we're alleged to believe is when they first met. And I would argue that this isn't so much to protect Bill Gates, it's about protecting Microsoft, because Epstein in the 1990s, as well as the Maxwell family, extensively involved in the activities of Microsoft to a very significant, it's just very extreme. And Ghislaine Maxwell herself was involved in some of those business connections as well at a time when she was involved with Epstein. Epstein was also involved in a very suspicious trip, a delegation Microsoft sent to Russia in 1998, where he's touring local high schools in Russia with Microsoft executives. Some of those executives, like Nathan Myhrvold, later are allegedly tied to his sex trafficking operations and named by prominent Epstein victims as their abusers. And you also have Microsoft executives like Linda Stone also being in the mix there as well. So there's several executives. And Melanie Walker, who I just mentioned, ended up dating a top Microsoft executive in the early 2000s as well.
Stay free. See it first on Rumble.